The moment Daniel Matthews stepped into that restaurant, he had no idea he was walking into the chapter that would change his entire life. Sometimes, the most important people are already in our lives, hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to finally see them. Hey there, amazing viewers. If you're enjoying this story already, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartfelt content just like this one. Your support means the world to us. It was a crisp Friday evening when Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from his 8-year-old daughter's babysitter. Emergency. Need to leave early. 6 simple words that would set in motion a chain of events he could never have anticipated. As a single father working as the senior graphic designer at Horizon Marketing, Daniel had perfected the art of juggling responsibilities, but tonight, he found himself without options. Daniel stared at his half-eaten pasta, the restaurant's ambient lighting casting shadows across his worried face. His daughter, Sophie, sat across from him, coloring contentedly on the children's menu. Her dark curls fell across her face as she concentrated, reminding him so much of her mother that it sometimes hurt to look at her. But it was a sweet kind of pain now, 5 years after the accident. "Sweetheart, I need to make a quick call," Daniel said, reaching across to tuck a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear. "Is it work again, Daddy?" Sophie asked without looking up, her crayon never pausing its journey across the paper. Daniel sighed. "No, it's about Mrs. Peterson. She needs to leave early tonight, so I'm trying to figure something out." He scrolled through his contacts, unsure who to call at 7 p.m. on a Friday. That's when he saw her, Alexis Winters, his boss, sitting 3 tables away. Even in the dim lighting, he recognized her immediately. The confident posture, the elegant black dress, the way she tucked her auburn hair behind her ear when she was uncomfortable, which she was clearly doing repeatedly now. Across from her sat a man who seemed to be talking without pause, his hands gesturing dramatically as Alexis's smile grew increasingly strained. Daniel hesitated. Alexis had always been professional, fair, and kind, especially understanding when it came to his situation as a single parent. But she was still his boss, and this was clearly her private time. Sophie followed his gaze. "Isn't that Miss Winters from your office? The one who sent me the birthday present?" "Yes," Daniel answered, surprised that Sophie remembered. Alexis had indeed sent Sophie a beautifully wrapped art set for her birthday last month, even though they'd never actually met. It was that thoughtfulness that had always stood out about Alexis. In the 3 years he'd worked under her, she'd created a workplace culture that respected the balance between work and family, something Daniel valued immensely. As if sensing their attention, Alexis glanced over. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Daniel could have sworn he saw something like relief flash across her face before she quickly returned her attention to her date. But not before Daniel noticed her hand reaching up to her ear and tugging it gently, the signal they'd established in the office for "rescue me from this meeting." "Sophie," Daniel said, making a split-second decision, "how would you like to meet Miss Winters?" The next few minutes played out like a scene from a movie. Daniel approached the table with Sophie in tow, apologizing for the interruption. "Ms. Winters, I'm so sorry, but there's an urgent matter at the office that needs your immediate attention." "The Carlton account," he added, naming a client that didn't exist. The gratitude in Alexis's eyes was unmistakable as she excused herself from her date, who looked more annoyed at the interruption of his monologue than disappointed by her departure. "Thank you," Alexis whispered once they were out of earshot. "That was possibly the worst date of my life. He spent 20 minutes telling me about his fantasy football league and another 15 explaining why his ex-girlfriend was crazy for asking him to text when he'd be late." Daniel laughed. "Happy to help. Though I should confess, I have my own crisis. My babysitter cancelled, and I'm stuck without backup." Alexis looked at Sophie, who was watching them with curious eyes. "Well, it seems we can help each other out tonight. I've been wanting to meet this young lady anyway." She knelt down to Sophie's level. "You must be Sophie. I've heard so much about you from your dad." Sophie smiled shyly. Thank you for my birthday present. I use the paints all the time. You're very welcome, Alexis replied, her professional demeanor softening. I'd love to see your artwork sometime. And just like that, a spontaneous evening was born. They decided to finish dinner together, Sophie chattering excitedly about school and her art projects, while Daniel and Alexis slipped easily into conversation that flowed between work and personal interests. It was the first time they'd interacted outside the office, and Daniel was surprised by how natural it felt, how easily Alexis fit into their little world. What Daniel didn't notice, though Sophie would later tell him with the brutal honesty only children possess, was the way Alexis looked at him when he wasn't watching, with the kind of tenderness reserved for someone who has claimed a special place in your heart. But Alexis had been harboring feelings for Daniel for over a year, keeping them carefully contained behind the professional boundary of boss and employee. How could she not fall for him? She'd watched him balance single parenthood with unwavering dedication to his work, never complaining even when he had to leave early for school events or when Sophie was sick. She'd seen his creativity and passion shine through his designs. And unlike many of the men she'd dated, who seemed intimidated by her success, Daniel had always respected her authority while treating her like an equal. For Alexis, who had climbed the corporate ladder through determination and countless sacrifices, finding someone who understood the demands of her career while still maintaining such deep personal integrity seemed like an impossible dream. Until Daniel. Yet she had kept her feelings locked away, convinced that crossing that line would be unprofessional and potentially disastrous for the workplace dynamic she'd worked so hard to create. So instead, she'd settled for disastrous dates arranged by well-meaning friends, like tonight's catastrophe with Brad, the fantasy football enthusiast. As the impromptu dinner ended and they walked together through the parking lot, Sophie skipping ahead, Alexis found herself reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you again for the rescue, she said, her breath forming small clouds in the cool night air. I think I owe you one. Daniel smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and created small crinkles at the corners. Actually, I should be thanking you. Sophie had a great time, and so did I. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Maybe we could do this again sometime, Alexis ventured, immediately adding, Sophie mentioned wanting to show me her artwork. Daniel hesitated, and Alexis immediately regretted her suggestion. Had she crossed a line? I'd like that, he finally said. Sophie would love it too. She hasn't stopped talking about your art set since she got it. The relief Alexis felt was perhaps disproportionate to such a small victory, but as she drove home that night, she couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a date, it couldn't be, not while she was his boss, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. What neither of them realized was how quickly that beginning would evolve, facing challenges neither could have anticipated. The following Monday at work brought an uncomfortable reality check when Alexis received an email from HR about the company's updated policy on workplace relationships. The timing seemed almost comically targeted, though she knew it was merely coincidence. The policy wasn't prohibitive but required disclosure and potential reassignment to avoid conflicts of interest. Meanwhile, Daniel was facing his own dilemma. Sophie had developed an immediate attachment to Alexis, asking repeatedly when they would see her again. She's pretty and nice, and she listens when I talk about my art, Sophie explained matter-of-factly over breakfast. Most of your friends just pat my head and ask about school. She's my boss, Sophie, Daniel reminded her gently. We work together. Sophie looked unimpressed by this distinction. So? Mrs. Peterson says you need more friends. Grown-up friends. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who often watched Sophie after school, had indeed made similar comments, though with less subtlety. A handsome young man like you shouldn't be spending every evening with an old lady and a child, she declared more than once. The truth was, Daniel had intentionally kept his social circle limited after Jennifer's death. Dating seemed impossibly complicated, not just logistically with Sophie to consider, but emotionally. How could he explain to someone new the space Jennifer still occupied in their lives? How she wasn't just a sad story but a presence they still honored. Yet something about Friday night had felt different. Alexis had asked questions about Jennifer with genuine interest, not the uncomfortable curiosity or pity he usually encountered. She'd listened to Sophie's stories about her mom with warmth and encouragement, understanding intuitively that keeping Jennifer's memory alive was important to them both. Over the next few weeks, a new pattern emerged. Professional interactions at work remained exactly that, professional. But there were small moments, a lingering smile, a shared glance, a cup of coffee that appeared on his desk when he was having a particularly stressful day. And then there were the text messages, initially about a project but gradually expanding to include book recommendations, funny observations, and eventually pictures of Sophie's latest art projects. The first real test of their evolving relationship came a month later when Sophie fell ill at school with a high fever. Daniel was in the middle of presenting to a major client when his phone buzzed repeatedly. Alexis, noting his distraction, smoothly took over the presentation while gesturing for him to step out. The school nurse's message sent him into a panic. Sophie's temperature was 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and she needed to be picked up immediately. But the client meeting was crucial, his car was in the shop, and the rideshare app on his phone showed a 20-minute wait time. Without thinking, he texted Alexis, "Sophie's sick at school. Need to leave but can't get there quickly." Her response came within seconds, "Go. I've got the client. Take my car." She followed with her parking space number and where to find her keys in her office. That night, as Sophie finally slept peacefully after medication brought her fever down, Daniel sent another text, "I don't know how to thank you enough." Alexis's reply was simple, "You don't need to. How's our girl doing?" Our girl. Two simple words that somehow encompassed everything changing between them. The following day, Alexis showed up at his door with soup, children's books, and a stuffed unicorn for Sophie. She didn't stay long, conscious of not overstepping, but her presence left a warmth in the apartment that lingered long after she left. It became increasingly clear to everyone except Daniel that Alexis had fallen deeply in love with him. Her assistant noticed how she lit up when he entered a room. The creative team whispered about how their usually decisive boss became flustered when he disagreed with her in meetings. Even Sophie, with her child's intuition, recognized something the adults seemed determined to ignore. "Daddy," she asked one evening as he tucked her into bed, "do you like Miss Alexis? Like her?" Daniel froze, caught off guard by his daughter's directness. "She's a good friend and a great boss," he answered carefully. Sophie rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of a child who believes adults are being deliberately obtuse. "She looks at you the way Princess Tiana looks at Prince Naveen after he's not a frog anymore." Daniel laughed despite himself. "Is that your professional artistic analysis?" "Yep," Sophie nodded seriously. "And she's always happy when you're there. Her voice gets different." Daniel dismissed his daughter's observations, but they planted a seed of awareness he couldn't quite shake. He began noticing things, how Alexis always found a reason to touch his arm when they spoke, how she remembered every detail about Sophie, how her laughter seemed more genuine around him. Yet every time these thoughts surfaced, he pushed them away. She was his boss. She was successful, beautiful, ambitious. Surely she wasn't interested in a single father with baggage and limited free time. Besides, workplace relationships were complicated at best, potentially disastrous at worst. The situation came to a head at the company's annual charity gala. Daniel normally skipped these events, but this year Alexis had personally asked him to attend, emphasizing how the client he'd helped secure would be there. She'd even arranged for Mrs. Peterson to watch Sophie for the evening. The venue was spectacular, a historic hotel downtown transformed with twinkling lights and elegant decorations. Daniel felt distinctly out of place in his rarely worn suit until he spotted Alexis across the room. She was stunning in a deep blue gown that caught the light when she moved, her hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. When their eyes met, her smile transformed her face, and Daniel felt something shift in his perception of her, no longer just his boss, no longer just a friend, but a woman who took his breath away. Throughout the evening, they gravitated toward each other between networking obligations. Daniel found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing the grace with which she navigated conversations, the genuine interest she showed in everyone she spoke with, the quiet authority she commanded without ever raising her voice. As the formal part of the evening wound down and the band began playing, Alexis appeared at his side. "I believe I still owe you for that rescue a few months ago," she said with a smile. "Would a dance begin to repay my debt?" On the dance floor, with her hand in his and the subtle scent of her perfume enveloping him, Daniel finally allowed himself to acknowledge what had been building between them. When she looked up at him, something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression, he nearly kissed her right there. But before he could act on the impulse, they were interrupted by the company's CEO, pulling Alexis away for an introduction to an important investor. The moment shattered, leaving Daniel both relieved and disappointed. Later that night, as they stood outside waiting for their respective rides, Alexis broke the silence. "Daniel, I think we need to talk about what's happening between us." His heart rate accelerated. "What do you think is happening?" She took a deep breath. "I think we've become important to each other in ways that go beyond our professional relationship. At least, you've become important to me." Daniel felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. "Alexis." "Wait, please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I've been fighting this for a long time because I'm your boss and because I respect you too much to complicate your life. But tonight I realized that maybe I've been making assumptions about what you want or don't want." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "So I'm just going to ask, do you feel it too? This connection between us? Because if you don't, I'll never mention it again, and nothing will change at work. I promise you that." The vulnerability in her voice, the courage it took for her to speak first, it moved something in Daniel that had been frozen for a long time. But as he opened his mouth to respond, his phone rang with Mrs. Peterson's ringtone. Sophie had woken up with nightmares and was asking for him. "I have to go," he said, the conflict evident in his expression. "Sophie needs me." Alexis nodded, disappointment flickering across her face before she composed herself. "Of course. She comes first. Always." Daniel hesitated, then made a decision. "Come with me. Sophie would love to see you, and we can finish this conversation after she's asleep." The surprise and hope that blossomed on Alexis's face was answer enough. They shared a rideshare to his apartment, sitting in a charged silence, both aware that something fundamental was changing between them. Sophie was indeed delighted to see Alexis, despite her tear-streaked face. She had dreamed about her mother, she explained in a small voice, and couldn't remember what her laugh sounded like anymore. What happened next cemented Alexis in both their hearts forever. Instead of offering platitudes or changing the subject, she sat on Sophie's bed and asked gently, "Would you like to tell me about your mom? What do you remember about her?" For the next hour, Sophie shared stories while Daniel sat on the other side of the bed, occasionally adding details or correcting exaggerations. Alexis listened with genuine interest, asking questions that helped Sophie articulate her memories more clearly. By the time Sophie drifted back to sleep, the fear had left her face, replaced by a peaceful contentment. In the living room afterward, Daniel handed Alexis a glass of wine. "Thank you for that. Most people get uncomfortable when Sophie talks about Jennifer. She was Sophie's mother. She'll always be part of who Sophie is," Alexis replied simply. "And part of who you are too." The honesty in her voice gave Daniel the courage to be equally honest. "To answer your question from earlier, yes. I feel it too. I've been trying not to, because it's complicated and because I'm terrified of messing up what we already have. But yes, there's something between us that feels important." Alexis's smile was radiant. "So where do we go from here?" Slowly, Daniel answered. "For Sophie's sake, and for ours. And we'll need to figure out the work situation. I've already looked into it, Alexis admitted with a slight blush. When we disclose, you would report to Michael instead of directly to me. Everything else stays the same. Daniel laughed softly. You've thought this through. I've had time, she confessed. I've been falling for you for over a year. The revelation stunned him. A year? But you never said anything. How could I? You're my employee. I had to be sure it wasn't just attraction, that it was something real and lasting. And I needed to know you might feel the same way. Daniel reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. So we're doing this? Actually giving it a chance? I'd like to try, Alexis said softly. If you would. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. The following months were not without challenges. The official disclosure to HR created exactly the kind of office gossip they'd hoped to avoid. Some colleagues assumed Alexis had been giving Daniel preferential treatment all along, while others speculated that he was using her to advance his career. Sophie, initially excited about Alexis's increased presence in their lives, sometimes struggled with complicated feelings of loyalty to the mother she barely remembered. Would Mom be mad if she knew? She asked Daniel one night, her voice small. Daniel had pulled her close. Your mom loved us both very much. More than anything, she would want us to be happy. Alexis doesn't replace your mom, sweetheart. No one could ever do that. The most unexpected challenge came from Jennifer's parents, who had remained a steady presence in Sophie's life. They expressed concern about this new relationship, worried that their granddaughter was being asked to adapt to too many changes. Through each obstacle, Alexis proved herself to be exactly what both Daniel and Sophie needed, patient, understanding, and unwavering in her commitment to respecting Jennifer's place in their lives while carefully creating her own. 6 months into their relationship, as they prepared for Sophie's 9th birthday party, Daniel found himself watching Alexis as she hung decorations, laughing at something Sophie said. The sight of them together, his daughter and the woman he now knew he loved, filled him with a contentment he hadn't felt in years. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep surrounded by new presents and with cake crumbs still on her bedspread, Daniel took Alexis's hand and led her to the small balcony of his apartment. I've been thinking about that night at the restaurant, he said, when I had no idea you were on a terrible date and you had no idea I was in a childcare crisis. How randomly our lives intersected at exactly the right moment. Alexis smiled. I wouldn't call it random. We were already in each other's lives. We just finally saw each other clearly. That's what I love about you, Daniel said, the words slipping out naturally. You always see things more clearly than I do. Alexis's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had used that word, love. I do, you know, he continued softly. Love you. Not just for what you've brought to my life, but for what you've brought to Sophie's. For the way you make space for our past while helping us build a future. Tears glistened in Alexis's eyes. I love you too. Both of you. More than I ever thought possible. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony with Sophie serving as both flower girl and best daughter, a title she had insisted upon. Jennifer's parents sat in the front row, having come to appreciate Alexis's genuine care for their granddaughter and her respect for their daughter's memory. At the reception, Sophie presented them with a painting she had created in secret, 3 figures holding hands, Daniel, Alexis, and herself, with a 4th figure watching over them from a swirl of clouds, her yellow hair matching Sophie's own. That's Mom, she explained unnecessarily. She's still with us, but now we have Alexis too. I think that makes us extra lucky. As Daniel looked at his new wife, who was kneeling to embrace his daughter with tears in her eyes, he marveled at how life had led him here, from that desperate evening when he spotted his boss on a bad date to this moment of profound happiness. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with a rescue. Sometimes we save others only to discover they were meant to save us too. And sometimes, the love we're looking for is already there, waiting patiently for us to finally see it. If you've enjoyed this story of unexpected love and second chances, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content that reminds us all that hope and love can find us in the most unexpected ways, often when we need them most.